I'm Jo Townsend. We're making this short video today to support the kit that we've put together, which is a small kit on pinching porcelain. There's a couple of projects in the kit, a rose and a pinched bowl. And as part of your kit, you will get a kilo of Keen's mid-fire alumina porcelain. You'll get a palette full of slips, some wooden tools. What you won't get that you will need is some kind of paintbrush, even just a very cheap one like this, and something to cut your clay with. If you have a clay cutter, that's great. If not, then a piece of string or a piece of fishing wire is fine. If you're interested in these kits, please visit our website www.canberrapotters.com.au. So with this small ball of clay, which is probably about 50 grams, we'll make a rose. So to start with, you'll just pull off a small piece of clay, roll it in your hands and start to flatten and pinch it out. See, that small ball of clay makes quite a large petal, and you can see you get these little torn edges as you pinch at them. That actually ends up looking very natural. When you look at the edge of a rose petal, it's got this quite fine, almost torn edge looking to it. So you can see as you work the clay, one of the things with porcelain, as soon as you work it, it starts to get very floppy and hard to manage. So what we'll do is we'll just put that down there for a few minutes. This is an absorbent surface, so it'll dry out quite quickly. I've actually probably used a bit too much on that, but it'll be good for the central petal, not a pellet. And so now I'll pinch out another one. So I'm really working and thinking about how I want that edge to look. If my hands get a bit dirty, I'll just scrub them back on the sponge. If it's sticking too much, you can add just a tiny, tiny amount of water so your hands will slide a bit more readily. But you don't want to introduce a lot of moisture at this point. Okay, so you can see it's still pretty floppy, so we'll leave it for a little bit longer and we'll make another petal. And then we can start to assemble once they've just firmed up a little bit. So just pinching it out. And see how sticky. Porcelain's very different to other clays in that. That's too hard to, so I'll mush it up and take another one. I've gone too far with that, it's got too thin. So squeezing it out, just squeezing it out. And I'll just pop it on the table, let it firm up a little bit. So we're going to start with this one. You can see it's starting to get a little bit more, a little less flop to it. You still want it nice and flexible. Now this is going to be the central petal of your rose. So when you're rolling it up, think you want it to be tight at the bottom and open at the top. So keep it rolled around and open up. This is too big and we're going to just pinch off the bottom. But it's easier to make it a little bit bigger, and then you can just pinch off that bit and get rid of it and squish that up. Because this is very soft, you don't need to add moisture, you don't need to add slip, you can just attach it to itself. So I'm going to leave that to set up for just a minute and make another petal. So it's a little process of thinking how long are things going to take, how much time do they need, and have things ready to roll. So that will keep firming up, and then when I add the next one, it's a little bit easier. It's not wanting to fall over as much. So I've gone much smaller in my petals as I've gone along. So I'm actually going to tear this one down and start to add, because that's all still very soft. Now, that's very flat. Before I add this one, I'm going to just bend it around and pinch it. And if you end up with too much clay back there, again, you can just pinch it off and keep it clean. Bit of clay stuck under my fingernail. So think about how petals go onto the rose. This makes a big difference. The dance between each petal makes a big difference. They overlap sort of a third or so, so have a look. Look at what you like and just squish all that together and flip that little edge out and just keep it going. And then pop it down. And again, we'll make another petal while we're waiting for the next one to firm up. Just dampening my fingers, just very slightly. I don't want them wet, but if they're just slightly damp, they don't stick as much. A bit like the old ladies in the post office cleaning their fingers on the stamps. Okay, whoops, don't want to do that one just yet. Pick up, get yourself organised and put them in order so you don't get confused. Pinch that bottom together so you've got a nice little curled up space. Overlap those two. How are they going to go on? Have a look at them and then squish that base in together. It's getting very thick at the bottom, but that's okay, we'll deal with that later. So I'll put that up there, make another petal. If you're concerned to make sure that you get your petals all the same size, make up a few balls, but don't leave them sitting on a dry surface. By the time you get to them, it might be a problem. You put them on a little bit of plastic and cover them over. I'm quite happy to be a little bit random. So, see how that one's a little bit wet, and you can see it's a little bit too hard to manage. Pop it back on the ball and start again. Oops, that one's too small. Okay, pinching it out. So what you really need to be thinking about is the basic shape, but also it's all about this edge. The edge is the important part. And if it tears or if it gets these, I love these little, I don't know, pulled parts, that really starts to make it look like a rose. And when it becomes fully fired and translucent, those things really start to show up. So I'll pinch this petal together and then pop it around there. So as we go around, we're going to start to, we might need to use something softer to put it on so we're not flattening it on the table. I'll make one more petal, and you can make as many petals as you want. There's no right or wrong. You can make them any size you want. The important thing is to decide what you want your rose to look like. That one down there, have my border happening. There we go. Have a good look each time as to where you want it to be, and make sure each petal overlaps. And if you're not that happy with that bit, give it a little bit of extra loving right there. Okay, we'll take this one, again overlap it. And overlap it. And that's going to do it for us today. So what I will do now, so you can see it's still pretty floppy. So I need to be quite careful. If I do too much to it right now, I'm going to wreck it. So I'm going to actually gently put it upside down there and leave it for about 5 minutes, after which I'll pinch that end off and I'll poke a couple of little holes in there just to make sure all the moisture can get out. So the first thing we're going to do now before we decorate our rose is we're just going to reconstitute these slips. We've let them dry out so that they'll stay in the palettes, and all you need is a couple of drops like that. Just drop some water on there. Don't add too much. Give it a minute to sit itself up and you'll be amazed at how quickly it will sink in. So this orange one's already a little bit I've dampened the orange and the red one, I dampened down a little bit earlier. But don't add too much. A couple of drops at a time is all you need. So while those are soaking up, we'll come back to our rose that we left to the side before. You can see it's not super hard yet, but I can touch it and it's not totally flopping everywhere. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take my skewer and carefully, if you've got a little knife or something, you can do that. I'm just going to cut away that excess at the bottom. Gently pick it up. Handling it badly at this stage, you can certainly dent it. And I'll stick a bit of a hole up there so that I know there's no air or water trapped. And then I can just gently settle it on the table so that it's got a point that it wants to sit on and it's not rolling around. So for me, I like to, with these, just work up a little bit of colour. I don't want it really intense, so I'll just use this that's on the top here, and I'm just going to brush nice and loosely from the inside of the petal out. I'm happy to leave some little bits that are still going to be white, so it's almost like a bit of a stripy rose. I like that look because I just love the look of the pure white translucent porcelain. This is so fine that you will definitely get white light coming through on the thinner bits, and you'll really see the texture, like these little bits here where the clay is slightly thicker. It really shows up because of the translucence. So we'll just run a little bit of colour on it very quickly like that. Keep it loose. You can paint it all over and make it really thick, but you will lose your translucence if you do that. But it's all choices. What do you want? Then just leave it to dry, and when it's drier, you can do the same on the back. So now we're going to make a little pinched bowl. So I would recommend, when you're starting with pinching things, have something that fits easily into your hand. The maximum should be something you can just about reach those 2 fingers in. This is about 60 grams of clay. For most people, 100 or 120 grams of clay is quite a lot to manage as a pinch pot. It gets hard to make it even and hard to make it nice. Particularly, as you recall, that as you start to work the porcelain, it starts to get floppier and floppier. So this is something you might need to stop and do in a couple of stages. So, basic pinch pot technique. Get yourself a nice little round ball. You've got this perfect complex curve that you were born with. Use this. This is your best friend for making pinch pots. So we're going to stick thumb halfway into the pot, like that. So you can see it's still curved on the bottom. So now we start to work the very bottom of the pot. And my thumb's stuck in there good and proper. So it was slightly damp when I put it on. So I'm just really, at this point, I'm working this part of the pot only. I'm not worrying about the rest, but I am controlling that shape. The most common thing that people do when they start to make a pinch pot is they end up making a flat disc. So you've really got to watch that you're keeping some vertical things. So the action is this. That's what I'm doing at the moment. And moving it just very slightly. I'm just going to give that thumb of mine a clean because it's a bit sticky, and I'll dry it off a bit because I don't want it to be too wet. If you introduce a lot of water, now I'm starting to do this. So that allows me to smooth out that bottom. But I don't know if you can see there, that part I've worked, and this part is still quite thick. You'll feel that. So really the idea of a pinch pot is to really be thinking about what's happening between your thumb and your fingers. And gently, you're coaxing that clay out. You always, and you work gently up. Gently up. Each time I'm going around, you can see here on the back where my fingers are. And some bits will be slightly thicker than others, and you can keep coming back over them. Don't be in a hurry. That's the key to this process. Slow and steady. And you can see that edge is still quite thick. So whenever I think I need a little bit more moisture, I dip one finger, shake it off, give it a rub, maybe even dab it off on my... So all I want is something that can slide. Because you don't want to add a lot of moisture at this point, because your pinch pot will turn into a floppy pot very quickly. You can see how it's already losing its structure. As I turn it around, it's less round. Just take your time. If you find your fingers get a bit tired, swap hands. Us potters have to learn to be ambidextrous, because you've got to use both hands for everything you do, really. I'm just having a feeling for thicker parts so that I can just make sure it's nice and even. And you can see from about here up, I've quite a lot of clay. And down here it's much finer. Right. So I'll just keep working around. So what I'm trying to do, as you can see, I'm using this hand to keep the shape going. And I just slowly work my way up. Each time you squeeze it, the clay wants to go out. So if you want it to stay small, you've got to think about squeezing up rather than out. And also this hand is your friend. So I'll leave the final rim for a little while. It's not perfectly even. Can you see how it's getting quite floppy now? I'm just about at the point where I'm going to need to leave it to sit for 10, maybe even 20 minutes before I can see it's really starting to go floppy. So what I'll do is I'll just pop it on there and I'll let it sit up for a few minutes before I try and do anything more. So if you do it now, it's likely that it will just get floppier and floppier. You'll stick your finger through the side and you won't get the fineness that you want. But if you wait. So this has just been sitting here for a few minutes, and already you can see it's starting to hold its shape a little bit better. I'm losing the floppiness. That's where porcelain can be very frustrating. So you've got to allocate time and take your time. And you can see as soon as I start to work it again, even though I'm pinching it, that pinching makes it stronger because it's compressing it, but working the porcelain brings up its plasticity and it gets very soft and very floppy. So I'm really concentrating on the shape. What shape do I want it to be? Because porcelain also has a very strong memory, and the way you work it, you might get it perfectly round right at the end, but if you've worked it not perfectly round, it's going to go back to that. That's why it's a bit of a prima donna. It'll do what it wants to do, so learn to love the incongruities you're going to get. So you can see I'm starting to work up to that edge. And at this point I'm thinking, well, how do I want to finish this bowl? What do I want? What's the shape I'm after? Do I want to put a foot ring on it? Do I want it to just sit on the table? Do I want to add great long legs? All of these are choices. And you can start to think about the form of your bowl. My bowl has this very narrow base on it. So I'm thinking about, is that too narrow? Maybe I'll open it up a little bit at the bottom. I've still got a little bit I can work with there. And because I've used a small piece of clay, I can still reach my hand down into the bottom. The bigger the clay you use, the more you pinch it, the less you can get to the bottom. So really start small. It gives you the biggest range to play with, and when you don't like something you can come back. So we have included in your kit a couple of these, just because they've got lovely compound curves. What shape do you want? You can start to use some of these like a rib. If you have other ribs that you really like to use them. If it sticks, dip it in the water, wipe it off on the sponge. You don't want to add a lot of moisture. But if you don't want it smooth like that, if you don't want to make it smooth, stick only with your fingers. It's a choice. It's entirely up to you. So you can see it's still quite thick on the rim. It's much thicker on the rim than it is anywhere else. So I'll start to work that rim all the way out. And I'm thinking I might really pinch this rim right out, and I might start to tear it in a minute too. So again, a little bit of moisture, not too much, keeping it going. And this is, you can see how as I'm really pinching this out, it's really wanting to flare out. And I'm thinking, well, actually I'm going to go with that because that'll give me a kind of tulipy shape and it'll be quite an interesting shape. Just a little bit. Keep thinking about what's going on. What I'm doing here is I'm really drawing that clay up and pinching it at the same time. And you can see I'm getting quite a lot more height just in this last little bit. And I'm very consciously controlling the shape with this hand. Where I put my finger there is really defining that bowl shape. So pull them all up, pull them up, pull them up, and think, do I like that? What if I were to literally just pinch little bits off the side? I quite like that jagged edge, or is it too jagged? If you don't like it quite that jagged, you can wait till it's just about dry and you can just wipe it off. And you'll get things like that. It'll find a little thinner spot. Do you like that? Go with it. Work with what you've got. If you don't like it, you can just mush it up and start again. Nothing is too precious or too problematic. But you can see where I've been a bit thinner in some places and a bit thicker in others. That sponge is quite wet now. Squeeze it out so that I don't get quite so much water when I touch the sponge. Okay. So now we've got some quite different edges. Some parts have torn more than others, and where I started, I wasn't being quite as bold, and it looks odd, so I'll go back and I'll have a good think about that. So at this point, you can see it's quite floppy. I can actually just very gently put it down like that and let it sit up. And now that it's upside down, I can just squash up that clay I pulled off and think, well, what do I want? Do I want to put a foot ring on it? Maybe I'll give it some funny little legs. So, but if I want to put a foot ring on it, I just roll out a sausage of clay. In this case, you don't want something enormous because it's not exactly an enormous bowl. And don't forget, this porcelain has a shrinkage rate of nearly, it's about 16%, which is a hell of a lot. They come out a lot littler than you think they're going to. So you can do that. Smush it on. You can try. You can see I'm being very gentle in my touching so that I'm not just damaging that that foot too much. I might try some tripod legs. If you're going to make 3 things that are the same, either make them out of a sausage of clay like this, so they all start off the same length, or make them out of 3 balls of clay that are the same. You can see how that started to flatten. If when you're rolling a sausage of clay and it starts to flatten, just twist it up and roll again, and roll a little bit further than you did the time when it started to flatten. And you just check. My pressure is very light on this. I'm not using a lot of pressure. So if I want to put 3 legs on, it is easier to balance something on 3 legs. I'll just mark it out roughly. If you're really good and precise, you can actually get out a ruler and measure them. But this will be close enough. And so then what I'll do is I'll flatten out one end, just tack it on the table like that, and I'll make the other a bit skinny. And I'll look at all 3 of them before I put them on the pot to know that they talk to each other in a sensible way. They're about the same length, they're the same sort of shape. One's a little bit longer and a little bit skinnier on the end. I would take time. I won't do it in the video because it's not exciting to watch. So all I've done is just added a tiny little bit of moisture to the bottom of that. And all I'll do is jiggle and wiggle and twist them until I know that they're put on nice and solid. So 1, 2, yes, worth marking out where you're going, so because otherwise it's hard to get it right. That looks pretty even to me, maybe there, and that one might need to go a little bit further that way. So again, just make sure there's enough moisture on there that it's got something sticky to stick to. One of the nice things about working with porcelain is that it is such a sticky clay that you can very quickly attach it to itself. Get him out a bit. I'll leave that to set up for a little while, and then when I turn it upside down I can finish the rim and make sure that the feet are going to hold that pot. So once it can hold its own weight, you want to tip it up before it gets too firm so that you can make sure that it stands and you can still jiggle with them. So what I've got here is a little bit of that slip. I've just watered it down, and I'm just going to brush a bit of light colour on the inside so that it'll give me an option when it fires. Remember, all of these colours, they fire up much more intensely than they are on the palettes. This will be a much more of a sky blue than this slightly pastel colour that you're getting now. But I'll think, what do I want? I think I'm just going to brush a little bit more. You will see all these brush strokes, so make them with a little bit of purpose. Make them look like that's what you wanted, not like you were hesitant and you didn't like it and you poked at it. You just do it and let it be. So, drying. These pieces you can actually just, because they're very even and very small, you don't have to be as precise with the drying as a lot of porcelain pieces. It's important because they're very even. But what I would suggest to you is to put them into a box or onto a wooden plate. You can either wrap them loosely in plastic or you can wrap them in an old bed sheet. Either is good because it stops the drafts and it allows it to just dry even. We talk about slow drying. The most important thing is, in fact, even drying. And if your pot is super even, you can actually get away with drying it quite fast. But to be safe, cover them up and let them dry slowly. Because they have a lot of shrinkage to go. Remember, they're shrinking an awful lot. And that's why things will crack. It's because they're under pressure as they shrink, and then any little weak area will open up. Good luck, enjoy.